look at that. It's just gonna be a reading stream today, and because I upload these to YouTube, please refrain from using sound alerts. Kinda takes away from it. But that is okay. How was your day, Jess? How's everything going on that end? How's everything going for you, Jess? We're on chapter 8. Everything is good. That's awesome. I appreciate it. I would just turn off my sound alerts, but I'm not sure if that would actually break it or not. I figure it'd be good to do a little reading today, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna just short little reading stream. Nothing overly crazy. So I went to the gym this morning. I've been doing that again steadily. I got a lot of stress, so reading is a good escape. So we're gonna go into it, and I figure we'll just get into it, you know, and then maybe take a little break from stream and play a game of some sort. So yeah, but we're gonna just get into it now. A bit weirded out by the fact that I entered a classroom and my controller ran. Started playing music. Well, it's haunted. That's the perfect explanation there. It's your controller is haunted. That's literally all you need to know, is that it's haunted. So, alright, anyways. Gonna get into this. Let me know if the music volume is too loud or not. So, chapter 8. Soldiers from Hell. Butchery, betrayal. Thank you, Smug. Thank you for the lurk. Hopefully you're doing well today. So, chapter 8. Soldiers from Hell, butchery, betrayal. 30 seconds, yelled Vippus, his voice barely audible over the screaming jets as the drop pod sliced through Esteban 3's atmosphere. The Astartes of La Costa were bathed in a red light for a moment. Loken imagined what they would look like to the people of the Coral City when the assault began. Warriors from another world, soldiers from hell. "What's our landing point look like?" shouted Loken. Vippus glanced at the readout on a pick screen mounted above his head. "Drifting. We'll hit the target, but off-center. I hate these things. Give me a Stormbird any day." Loken didn't bother replying, barely able to hear Nero as the atmosphere thickened beneath the drop pod and the jets in its underside kicked in. The drop pod shuddered and began heating up as the enormous forces pushing against it turned to fire and noise. He sat through the last few minutes while everything around him was noise, unable to see the enemy he was about to fight and relinquishing control over his fate until the drop pod hit. Nero had been right when he said he preferred an assault delivered by Stormbirds, the precise surgical nature of an airborne assault far preferable to a warrior than this hurtling descent from above. But the War Master had decided that the spear tip would be deployed by drop pod, reasoning, rightly, Loken admitted, that thousands of Astartes smashing into the defenders' midst without warning would be more psychologically devastating. Loken ran through the moment the drop pod would hit in his mind, preparing himself for when the hatch charges would blow open. He gripped his bolter tightly and checked for the 10th time that his chainsword was in its scabbard at his side. Loken was ready. 10 seconds, Lacosta, shouted Vippus. Barely a second later, the drop pod impacted with such force that Loken's head snapped back, and suddenly the noise was gone and everything went black. Lucius killed his first foe without even breaking stride. The dead man's armor was like glass, shimmering and iridescent, and his halberd blade was fashioned from the same reflective substance. A mask of stained glass covered his face, the mouth represented by bleeding and filled with teeth like gem-like triangles. Lucius slid his sword clear, blood smoking from its edge as the soldier slumped to the floor. The curved arch of marble shone red in the dawn's early light above him, and a swirl of dust and debris drifted around the drop pod he had just leapt from. The Precentor's palace stood before him, vast and astonishing, a stone flower with the spire at its center like a spectacular twist of overlapping granite petals. More drop pods hammered into the ground behind him. The plaza around the palace's north entrances, the main objective of the Emperor's children. A nearby drop pod blew open, and ancient Rylanor stepped from its red-lit interior, his assault cannon already cycling and tracking for targets. "Nausicaa," yelled Lucius. "To me." Lucius saw a flash of colored glass from inside of the palace, movement beyond the sweeping stone panels of the entrance hall. More palace guards reacted to the sudden shocking assault, but contrary to what Lucius had been expecting, they weren't screaming or begging for mercy. They weren't even fleeing or standing stock still and numb with shock. With a terrible war cry, the palace guard charged and Lucius laughed, glad to be facing a foe with some backbone. He leveled his sword and ran towards them, Squad Nausicaa followed behind him, weapons at the ready. 100 palace guards ran at them, resplendent in their glass armor. They formed a line before the Astartes, leveled their halberds, and opened fire. Searing needles of silver filled the air around Lucius, gouging the armor of his shoulder guard and leg. Lucius lifted his sword arm to shield his head as the needles spat from the glowing blade of his sword. Where they hit stone around the entrance, it bubbled and hissed like acid. One of the Nausicaa fell beside Lucius, one arm molten and his abdomen bubbling. "Perfection in death!" cried Lucius. Running through the white-hot silver needles, the Emperor's children and the palace guard clashed with a sound like a million windows breaking, the terrible screaming of the halberd guns giving way to the clash of blade against armor and point-blank bolter fire. Lucius's first sword blow hacked through the halberd shaft and tore through the throat of the man before him. Sightless eyes glared back at him, blood pumping from the guard's ruined throat, and Lucius tore the helm from his foe's head to better savor the sensation of his death. A plasma pistol spat a tongue of liquid fire that wreathed an enemy soldier from head to foot, but the man kept fighting, sweeping his halberd down to cut deep into one of Lucius's men before another Astartes ripped his head off with a chainsword. Lucius pivoted on one foot from a halberd strike and hammered the hilt of his sword into his opponent's face, feeling a tight anger that the flaceplate held. The guard staggered away from him and Lucius reversed his grip and thrust the blade through the gap between the gas plates at the guard's waist, feeling the blade's energy field burning through abdomen and spine. Thank you for Lillard Conoco the cat. These guards were slowing the Emperor's children down, buying precious moments with their lives from something deeper in the palace. As much as Lucius was reveling in the sensation of the slaughter, the smell of blood and the searing stink of flesh as the heat of his blade scorched it and the pounding of blood in his veins, he knew he could not afford to give the defenders such moments. Lucius ran onwards, slicing his blade through limbs and throats as he ran. He fought as though following the steps of an elaborate dance, a dance where he played the part of the victor and the enemy were there only to die. The palace guard were dying around him, and his armor was drenched with their blood. He laughed in sheer joy. Warriors still fought behind him, but Lucius had to press on before the palace guard was able to stall their advance with more men in front of them. Squad Quenmundel, Ratharin, kill these and then follow me. Fire sawed from every direction as the Emperor's children forced their way to join the junction Lucius had reached. The swordsman darted his head past the corner, seeing a vast indoor seascape. A plume of water cascaded through a hole in the center of the colossal granite dome, The shaft of pink light fell alongside the water, sending brilliant rainbows of color between the arches formed by the petals of the dome's surface. Islands rose from the indoor sea that took up most of the dome, each topped by a picturesque follies of white and gold. Thousands of palace guards massed in the dome, splashing towards them through the waist-deep sea and taking up positions among the follies. Most wore the glassy armor of the men still dying behind Lucius, but many others were clad in far more elaborate suits of bright silver. Others were wrapped in long streamers of silk that rippled behind them like smoke as they moved. Rylanor emerged into the dome behind Lucius, his assault cannon smoking in the chisel-like grips of his power fist thick with blood. "They're massing," spat Lucius. "Where are the damned World Eaters?" "We shall have to win the palace by ourselves," replied Rylanor, his voice grating from deep within his sarcophagus. Lucius nodded, pleased that they would be able to shame the World Eater. "Ancient, cover us. Emperor's children, break cover fire. Nasike, keep up this time." Ancient Rylanor stepped from the junction, a spectacular wave of fire sheared through the air around him, a storm of heavy caliber shell casings and oil-soaked fumes streaming from the cannon mounted on his shoulder. His explosive fire shredded the stone of the foremost island's follies, broken and bloodied bodies tumbling from the shattered wreckage. "Go!" shouted Lucius. But the Emperor's children were already charging, their training so thorough that every warrior already knew his place in the complex pattern of overlapping fire and movement that sent the strike force sweeping into the dome. Savage joy lit up in Lucius's face as he charged, the thrill of battle and the sensations of killing stimulating his body with wondrous excess. It was a swirling cacophony of noise. The perfection of death had come to the Coral City. On the southern side of the palace, a strange, organically formed building clung to the side of the palace like a parasite, its bulging, liquid shape more akin to something that had been grown than something built. Its pale marble was threaded with dark veins, and the masses of its battlements hung like ripened fruit. From the expanse of the marble monument slabs, marking the passing of the city's finest and most powerful citizens, it was clear this was a sacred place. Known as the Temple of the Song, it was a memorial to the music that Father Istvan had sung to bring all things into existence. It was also the objective of the World Eaters. The word that the invasion had begun was already out by the time the first World Eater drop pods crashed into the plaza, shattering gravestones and throwing slabs of marble into the air. Strange music kinged through the morning air, calling the people of the Coral City from their homes and demanding that they take up arms. The soldiers from the nearby city barracks grabbed their guns as the war singers appeared on the battlements of the temple to sing the song of death for the invaders. Called by the war singers' laments, the people of the city gathered in the streets and streamed towards the battle. The World Eater strike force was led by Captain Erlin. As he emerged from his drop pod, he was expecting the trained soldiers that Angron had briefed them on, not thousands of screaming citizens swarming onto the plaza. They came in a tide, armed with anything and everything they had in their homes. But it was not weapons they carried, but their sheer numbers and the terrible song that spoke of killing and murder that made them deadly. "World Eaters to me," yelled Arlen, hefting his bolter and aiming into the mass of charging people. The white-armored warriors of the World Eaters formed a firing line around him, turning their bolters outwards. "Fire!" shouted Erlin, and the first ranks of the Coral City's inhabitants were cut down by the deadly volley. But the oncoming mass rose up like a spring tide as they clammed over the bodies of their dead. As the gap between the forces closed, the World Eaters put up their bolters and drew their chain swords. Erlin saw the unreasoning hatred in the eyes of his enemies and knew that this battle was soon to turn into a massacre. If there was one thing at which the World Eaters excelled, it was massacre. "Damn it," spat Vippus. "We must have hit something on the way in." Loken forced his eyes open. A slice of light where the drop pod had broken open provided the only illumination, but it was enough for him to check that he was still in one piece. He was battered, but he could feel no evidence of anything more than that. "Lacosta, sound off," ordered Vippus. The warriors of Lacosta shouted their names, and Loken was relieved to hear that none appeared to have been injured in the impact. He undid the buckle of his grav harness and rolled to his feet. The drop pod canted at an unnatural angle. He pulled his bolter from the rack and pushed his way through the narrow opening broken in the side of the drop pod. As he emerged into the bright sunshine, he saw they had struck a projecting pier of stone on one of the towers, the rubble of its destruction scattered around the ruined drop pod. He circled the wreckage, seeing that they were at least 200 meters above ground, wedged amongst the massive battlements of Siren Hold. To his left, he saw spectacular tomb spires encrusted with statues, while to his right was the Coral City itself. Its magnificent structures bathed in the rosy glow of the sunrise. From this vantage point, Loken could see the whole city, the extraordinary stone flower of the palace and the western defenses like scars across the landscape. Loken could hear gunfire from the direction of the palace and realized the Emperor's children and World Eaters were already fighting the enemy. Gunfire echoed from below, Sons of Horus units fighting in the tangle of shrines and statuary that filled the canyons between the tomb spires. "We need a way down," said Loken as Lacosta pulled themselves from the wreckage of the drop pod. Vippus jogged over with his gun at the ready. "Bloody ground surveyors must have missed the projections," he grumbled. "That's what it looks like," agreed Loken. But he saw another drop pod ricochet from the side of a tomb spire and careen downwards in a shower of broken statues. "Our warriors are dying," he said bitterly. "Someone is going to pay for this." "We look spread out," said Vippus, glancing down into the Siren Hold. Between the tomb spires, smaller shrines and temples butted against one another in a complex jigsaw. Plumes of smoke and explosions were already rising from the fighting. "We need a place to regroup," said Loken. He flicked to Torgadon's Vox channel. "Tarek, Loken here, where are you?" A burst of static was his only reply. He looked across the Siren Hold and saw one tomb spire close to the wall, its many levels supported by columns wrought into the shapes of monsters, its top sheared off by the impact of a drop pod. "Damn, if you can hear me, Tarek, make for the spire by the western wall, the one with the smashed top. Regroup there, I'm heading down to you." "Anything?" asked Vippus. "No, the Vox is a mess. Something's interrupting it." "The spires?" "It would take more than that," said Loken. "Come on, let's find a way off this damn wall." Vippus nodded and turned to his men. "Lacosta, start working for a way down." Loken leaned over the battlements as Lacosta fanned out to obey their leader's command. Beneath him, he could see the diminutive figures of Astartes fighting black-armored warriors in streaming firefight. He turned away, desperate to find a way down. "Here," shouted Brother Casto. "Lacosta Flamer's bearer. A stairway." "Good work," said Loken, making his way over to see what Casto had found. Sure enough, hidden behind a tall, eroded statue of an ancient warrior, was a dark stairway cut into the sand-colored stone. The passageway looked rough and unfinished, the stone pitted and crumbling with age. "Move," said Vippus. "Casto, lead the way." "Yes, Captain," replied Casto, plunging into the gloom of the passageway. Loken and Vippus followed him, the entrance barely wide enough for their armored bodies. The stairs descended for roughly 10 meters before opening into a wide, low-ceilinged gallery. "The wall must be riddled," said Vippus. "Catacombs," said Loken, pointing to the niches cut into the walls that held the moldering remains of skeletons, some still swaddled in tattered cloth. Castro led them along the gallery, the bodies becoming more numerous the deeper they went, the skeletal remains piled 2 or 3 deep. Vippus snapped around suddenly, bolter up and finger on the trigger. "Vippus? I thought I heard something." "We're clear behind," said Loken. "Keep moving and focus. This could." "Movement," said Casto, sending a blast of orange-yellow fire from his flamer into the darkness ahead of him. "Casto," barked Vippus. "Report. What do you see?" Casto paused. "I don't know. Whatever it was, it's gone now." The niches ahead guttered with flames, hungrily devouring the bare bones. Loken could see that there was no enemy ahead, only Istavanian dead. "There's nothing there now," said Vippus. "Stay focused, Lacosta. No jumping at shadows. You are sons of Horus." The squad picked up the pace, shaking thoughts of hidden enemies from their minds as they moved rapidly past the burning grave niches. The gallery opened into a large chamber, Loken guessing that it must have filled the width of the wall, the only light from the dancing flame at the end of Casto's flamer. Yellow light picking out the massive stone blocks of a tomb. Loken saw a sarcophagus of black granite, surrounded by statues of kneeling people with their heads bowed, hands chained before them. Panels set into the walls were covered in carvings where human forms acted out ceremonial scenes of war. Casto moved up. "Casto, move up," said Vippus. "Find us a way down." Loken approached the sarcophagus, running his hand down its vast length. Its lid was carved to represent a human figure, but he knew that it could not be a literal portrait of the body inside. Its face had no features save for a pair of triangular eyes fashioned from chips of colored glass. Loken could hear the song from the siren hold outside, even through the layers of stone, a single mournful tone that rose and fell, winding its way from the tomb spires. "War singer," said Loken bitterly. "They're fighting back. We need to get down there." The silver-armored guards started flying. Surrounded by the burning arcs of white energy, they leapt over the advancing Emperor's children, gleaming leaf-shaped blades slicing downwards from wrist-mounted weapons. Lucius rolled to avoid a hail of blades, the silver guards swooping low to behead two of Squad Quandramil, the charged blades cutting through their armor with horrific ease. He slid into the water, finding that it only reached his waist. Above him, the halberd guns of the palace guard were spraying silver fire at the Emperor's children. But the Astartes were moving and firing with their customary discipline. Even the bizarre sight of the palace defenders did not dissuade them from their patterns of movement and covering fire. A body fell into the water next to him, its head blasted away by bolter fire, blood pouring into the water in a scarlet bloom. Lucius saw the silver guards were too quick and turned too nimbly for conventional engagement. He would have to engage them unconventionally. One of the silver guards dived towards him, and Lucius could see the intricate filigree of the man's armor, the tiny gold threads like veins on the breastplate, and greaves of scrollwork that covered his face. The guard dived like a seabird, firing bright blade from his wrist. Lucius turned the missile aside with his sword and leapt to meet his opponent. Guard twisted in the air, trying to avoid Lucius, but he was too close. Lucius swung his sword and sliced the guard's arm from his body. His crackling sword searing through the armor, blood sprayed from the smoldering wound, and the guard fell, twisting back towards the water. Lucius fell with the dead man splashing into the lake as the Emperor's children finally reached their enemy. Volleys of bolter fire scoured the islands, and his warriors advanced relentlessly on the survivors. The palace guards were backing away, forming a tighter and tighter circle. Glass-armored guards lay dead in heaps, and the artificial lake was ruddy pink and choked with bodies. Rylanor's assault cannon set fire tearing through the silk-clad guards, who preternatural speed couldn't save them from the cannon shells, turned the interior of the dome into a killing ground. Another silver guard fell, bolter fire ripping through his armor. Squad Nasuke joined Lucius. He grinned wolfishly at them, elated at the prospect of fighting more of the silver guards. "They're running," said Lucius. "Keep them on back foot. Keep pressing on." "Squad Catherians reporting from the plaza," said Brother Scytherin. "The World Eaters are fighting around the temple on the north side." "Still?" "Sounds like they're holding off half the city." "Ah, they can have them. It's what the World Eaters are good at," laughed Lucius, relishing the certain knowledge of his superiority. Nothing in the galaxy could match that feeling, but already it was fading, and he knew he would have to procure yet more opponents to satisfy his hunger for battle. We press on to the throne room, he said. Ancient Rylanor secure our rear. The rest of you, we're going for Prawl. Follow me. If you can't keep up, go and join the Death Guard. His warriors cheered as they followed Lucius into the heart of the palace. Every one of them wanted to kill Prawl and hold his head aloft on the palace battlements so the whole of Coral City could see. Only Lucius was certain that Prowl's head would be his. The Andronius was quiet and tense. Its palatial rooms dark and its long echoing corridors empty of all but menials. The ship's engines pulsed dimly in the stern, only the rumble of directional thrusters shuddering through the ship. Every station was manned, and every blast door was sealed, and Tarvitz knew a battle alert when he saw it. The hull groaned, and Tarvitz felt the deep rumbling through the metal deck, sensations of the motion ship before the artificial gravity compensated. Ever since the first wave of the spear tip had launched, the vessel had been moving, and Tarvitz knew that his suspicions of something amiss were well founded. According to the mission briefings he had read earlier, Fulgrim's flagship had been assigned the role of launching the second wave once the palace and the Silent Hold had been taken. There was no need to move. The only reason to move a vessel after launch was to move into low orbit in preparation for a bombardment. Though he told himself he was being paranoid, Tarvitz knew that he had to see for himself what was going on. He made his way swiftly through the Andronius, towards the gun decks, keeping clear of such grand chambers as the Tarsilian Amphitheater and the columned grandeur of the Monument Hall. He kept to the areas of the ship where his presence would go unchallenged, and where those who might recognize him were unlikely to see him. He had told Rylanor that he wanted to renounce his position of honor in the Spear Tip to replace Captain Advakar as Eidolon's senior staff officer, relaying the commander's orders to the surface, but it would only be a matter of time before his subterfuge was discovered. Tarvitz descended into the lower reaches of the ship, far from where the Emperor's children dwelt in the most magnificent parts of the Andronius. The rest of the ship, inhabited by servitors and menials, was more functional, and Tarvitz knew he would pass without challenge here. The darkness closed around Tarvitz, and the yawning chasm of the engine structure opened out many hundreds of meters below the gantry on which he stood. Above the engine spaces were the reeking gun decks, where the mighty cannons, weapons that could level cities, were housed in massive armored revetments. "Stand by for ordnance," chimed an automated metallic voice. Tarvitz felt the ship shift again. This time he could hear the creak of the hull as the planet's upper atmosphere raised the temperature of the outer hull. Tarvitz descended an iron staircase at the end of the dark gantry, and the vast expanse of the gun deck sprawled before him. A titanic vault that ran the length of the vessel. Huge, hissing cranes fed the guns, lifting tank-sized shells from the magazine decks through blast-proof doors. Gunners and loaders sweated with their riggings, each gun serviced by 100 men who hauled thick chains and levers in preparation for their firing. Servitors distributed water to the gun crews, and Mechanicum adepts maintained vigil on the weapons to ensure they were properly calibrated. Tarvitz felt his resolve harden and his anger grow at the sights of the guns being made ready. Who were they planning to fire on, with thousands of stardays on the planet's surface bombarding the cruel city was absurd. Yet here the guns were loaded and ready to unleash hell. He doubted the men crewing these weapons knew which planet they were in orbit over, or even who they would be shooting at. Entire communities flourished below the decks of a starship, and it was perfectly possible that these men had no idea who they were about to destroy. He reached the end of the staircase and stepped foot on the deck, its high ceiling soaring above him like a mighty cathedral to destructive power. Tarvitz heard footsteps approaching and turned to see a robed adept in the livery of the Mechanicum. "Captain," inquired the adept, "is there something amiss?" "No," said Tarvitz. "I'm just here to ensure that everything is proceeding normally." "I can assure you, Lord, that the preparations for the bombardment are proceeding exactly as planned. The warheads will be launched prior to the deployment of the second wave. Warheads? Asked Tarvitz. Yes, Captain, said the adept. All bombardment cannons are loaded with air-bursting warheads loaded with virus bombs as specified in our order of battle. Virus bombs? Said Tarvitz, fighting to hold back his revulsion at what the adept was telling him. Is everything all right, Captain? Asked the adept, noticing the change in his expression. I'm fine, Tarvitz lied, feeling as his legs would give away any second. You can return to your duties. The adept nodded and set off towards one of the guns. Virus bombs. Weapons so terrible and forbidden that only the War Master himself and the Emperor before him could ever sanction their use. Each warhead would unleash the Life Eater virus, a rampant organism that destroyed life in all its forms and wiped out every shred of organic matter on the surface of a planet within hours. The magnitude of this new knowledge and its implications staggered Tarvitz as he felt his breath coming in short, painful gasps, as he attempted to reconcile what he knew with what he had just learned. His legion was preparing to kill the planet below, and he knew with sudden clarity that it could not be alone. It could not be alone in this. To saturate a planet with enough virus warheads to destroy all life would take many ships. And with the sick jolt of horror, he knew that such an order could only have come from the War Master. For reasons Tarvitz cannot even begin to guess at, the War Master had chosen to betray fully a third of his warriors, exterminating them in one fell swoop. I have to warn them, he hissed, turning and running for the embarkation deck. Chapter 9. The Power of a God. Regrouping. Honor Brothers. The stratagem was dark, lit only by braziers that burned with the flickering green flame. Where once the banners of the Legion's battle companies had hung from its walls, they were now replaced with those of the Warrior Lodge. The company banners had been taken down shortly after the spear tip had been deployed, and the message was clear. The Lodge now had primacy within the Sons of Horus. The platform from which the War Master had addressed the officers of his fleet now held a lectern upon which rested the Book of Lorgar. The War Master sat on the stratagem throne, watching reports coming in from Istvan III on the battery of pick screens before him. The emerald light picked out the edges of his armor and reflected from the amber gemstone forming the eye upon his breastplate. Reams of combat statistics streamed past, and picked relays showed the unfolding battles in the coral cities. The World Eaters were in the center of an epic struggle. Thousands of people were swarming into the plaza before the Precinctor's palace. The streets flowed with rivers of blood as the Astartes slaughtered wave after wave of Istavanians that charged into their guns and chain blades. The palace itself was intact, only a few palls of smoke indicating the battle raging through it as the Emperor's children fought their way through its guards. Bardus Prahl would be dead soon, though Horus cared nothing for the fate of Istvan III's rogue governor. His rebellion had simply given Horus the chance to rid himself of those he knew would never follow him on his great march to Terra. Horus looked up as Erebus approached. First Chaplain, said Horus sternly, matters are delicate. Do not disturb me needlessly. There is news from Prospero, said Erebus, unperturbed. The shadow whispers clung to him, darting around his feet and crozier he wore at his waist. Magnus? Asked Horus, suddenly interested. He lives yet, said Erebus, but not for lack of effort on the part of the Wolves of Fenris. Magnus lives, snarled Horus. Then he yet may be a danger. No, assured Erebus. The spires of Prospero have fallen, and the warp echoes with the powerful sorcery Magnus used to save his warriors and escape. Always sorcery, said Horus. Where did he escape to? I do not know yet, said Erebus, but wherever he goes, the Emperor's dogs will hunt him down. And he will either join us or die alone in the wilderness, said Horus. To think that so much depends on the personalities of so few. Magnus was nearly my deadliest enemy, perhaps as dangerous as the Emperor himself. Now he has no choice but to follow us until the very end. If Fulgrim brings Ferrus Manus into the fold, we have as good as won. Horus waved dismissively at the view screens depicting the battle in the Coral City. The Istovanians believe the gods have come to destroy them, and in a way they are right. Life and death are mine to dispense. What is that if not the power of a god? Captain Loken, Sergeant Vippus, good to see you both, says Sergeant Lockhurst, hunkered down in the shattered shell of a shrine to one of Istvan III's ancestors. We've been trying to raise all the squads, they're all over the place. The spear tip's shattered. And we'll reforge it here, replied Loken. Sporadic fire rattled through the valley, so he took cover beside Lockhurst. The sergeant's command squad was arrayed around a shrine ruin, bolters trained and occasionally snapping off shots at the shapes that darted through the shadows. Vippus and the survivors of Locusta huddled in ruins with them. The enemy wore the armor of ancient Istvan, tarnished bands of silver and black, and carried strange relic weapons, rapid-firing crossbows that hurled bolts of molten silver. Tales of heroism were emerging from the scores of individual battles among the tomb spires as Sons of Horus units fought off the soldiers of the Siren Hold. We've got good cover and a position we can hold, said Vippus. We can gather squads here and launch a thrust into the enemy. Loken nodded as Torgadon ducked into cover beside them. The Sons of Horus he had brought with him joining Lockhost's men at the walls. He grinned at Loken. What kept you, Garvey? We had to come down from the top of the wall, said Loken. Where are your warriors? They're everywhere, said Torgadon. They're making their way to this spire, but a lot of the squads are cut off. The Siren Hole was garrisoned by some elites, I suppose. They had a hell of an armory here, ancient things, looks like advanced tech. Loken nodded as Torgadon continued. Well, this spire is clear at least. I've got Vadon and Laka setting up a command post on the lower level. We can hold this position for now. There are 3 more legions in Coral City and the rest of the Sons of Horus in orbit. There's no need. The enemy has the field, replied Loken sharply. They can surround us. There are catacombs beneath our feet they could use to get around us. No, if we stay put, they will find a way to get us. This is their territory. We strike as soon as we can. This is a spear tip, and it's up to us to drive it home. Where? Asked Torgadon. The tomb spires, said Loken. We hit them one by one, storm them, kill whatever we find, and move on. We keep going and force them onto the back foot. Most of our spear tip is on its way, Captain, said Lacoste. Good, replied Loken, looking up the spires around the shrine. The shrine was in a valley formed by the spire they had come down, and the next spiral along, a brutal cylinder of stone with glowering faces carved into its surface. Dozens of arches around its base offered entrance and cover, their darkness occasionally lit by a brief flash of gunfire. A tangle of shrines littered the ground between the towers. Statues of the Coral City, notable dead, jutting from piles of ornate architecture, or the ruins of temple. Loken pointed to the tomb spire across the valley. As soon as we have enough warriors for a full thrust, that's what we hit. Lacoste, start securing the shrines around us and give us a good jumping off point. Get some men up on the first levels of this spire to provide covering fire. Heavy weapons if you got them. Gunfire echoed from the east, and Loken saw the forms of Astartes moving towards them. Sons of Horus and the library of Eshkelian's squad. More warriors were converging on their position, each fighting their own running battles among the shrines as they sought to regroup. This is more than a burial ground, said Loken. Whatever happened to Istvan III, it started here. This force is religious, and this is their church. No wonder they're crazy, replied Torgadon scornfully. Madmen love their gods. The controls of the Thunderhawk were loose, the ship trying to flip away from Tarvitz and go tumbling through space. He had only the most rudimentary training on these newer additions to the Astartes armoring. Most of that had been in atmosphere, skimming low over battlefields to drop troops or add fire support. Tarvitz could see Istvan III through the armored glass of the viewing bay, a crescent of sunlight creeping across its surface. Somewhere near the edge of the shining crescent was the city where his battle brothers and those of 3 other legions were fighting, unaware that they had already been betrayed. "Thunderhawk, identify yourself," said a voice through the gunship's vox. He must have entered the engagement envelope of the Andronius, and the defense turrets had acquired him as a target. If he was lucky, he would have a few moments before turrets locked on, moments he could put as much distance between his stolen Thunderhawk and the Andronius. "Thunderhawk, identify yourself," repeated the voice, and he knew that he had to stall in order to give himself time to get clear of the defense turrets. Captain Saul Tarvitz, traveling to the Endurance on liaison duty. Wait for authorization. He knew he wouldn't get authorization, but each second took him further from the Andronius and closer to the planets. He pushed the Thunderhawk as hard as he dared, listening to the hiss of static coming from the box, hoping against hope that somehow they would believe in him and allow him to go on his way. "Stand down, Thunderhawk," said the voice. "Return to the Andronius immediately." "Negative, Andronius," replied Tarvitz. "Transmission is breaking up." It was a cheap ploy, but one that might give him a few more seconds. "I repeat, go to hell," replied Tarvitz. Tarvitz checked the navigational pic for signs of pursuit, pleased to see there were none yet, and wrenched the Thunderhawk down towards Istvan III. "The Pride of the Emperor is in transit," announced Servin, senior deck officer of the Andronius, though the vessel's navigator claims to be encountering difficulties. "Lord Fulgrim will not be with us at any time soon." "Does he send any word of his mission?" asked Eidolon, at his shoulder. "Communications are still very poor," said Severin hesitantly. "But what we have does not sound encouraging." "Then we'll have to compensate with the excellence of our conduct and the perfection of our legions," said Eidolon. "The other legions may be more savage, or resilient, or stealthy, but none of them approaches the perfection of the Emperor's children, no matter what lies ahead. We must never let go of that." "Of course, Commander," said Severin, as his console lit up with a series of new warning lights. His hands danced over the console and he turned to face Eidolon. "Lord Commander," he said, "we may have a problem." "Do not speak to me of problems," said Eidolon. "Defense Control has just informed me that they have picked up a Thunderhawk heading for the planet's surface." "One of ours?" "It appears so," confirmed Severin, bending over his console. "Getting confirmation now." "Who's piloting it?" demanded Eidolon. "No one is authorized to travel to the surface." "The last communication with the Thunderhawk indicates that it is Captain Saul Tarvitz." "Tarvitz?" said Eidolon. "Damn him, but he is a thorn in my side." "It's certainly him," said Captain Servin. "It looks like he took one of the Thunderhawks from the planet-side embarkation deck." "Where is he heading?" asked Eidolon. "Exactly." "The Coral City," replied Severin. Eidolon smiled. "He's trying to warn them. He thinks he can make a difference. I thought we could use him, but he's too damn stubborn, and now he's got it into his head that he's a hero. Severin, get some fighters out there and shoot him down. We don't need any complications now." "Aye, sir," nodded Severin. "Fighters launching in 2 minutes." Mercedes wrung out the cloth and draped it over Euphrates' forehead. Euphrates moaned and shook her arms, thrashing as if she was throwing a fit. She looked pale and as thin as a corpse. "I'm here," said Mercedes, even though she suspected the comatose Images couldn't hear her. She didn't understand what Euphrates was going through, and it made her feel so useless. For reasons she didn't quite understand, she stayed with Chiral Cinderman and Euphrates as they moved around the ship. The vengeful spirit was the size of a city. It had plenty of places in which to hide. Word of their coming went ahead of them, and wherever they went, grime-streaked engine crewmen and boiler-suited maintenance workers were there to show them to safety, supply them with food and water, and catch a glimpse of the saint. At present, they sheltered in one of the engine housings, a massive hollow tube that was normally full of burning plasma and great thrusting pistons. Now the engine was decommissioned for maintenance, and it made for a good bolt hole, hidden in secret despite the vast dimensions. Cinderman slept on a thin blanket beside Euphrates, and the old man had never looked more exhausted. His thin limbs were spotted and bony, his cheeks sunken and hollow. One of the engine crew hurried up to the nook where Keela lay on a bundle of blankets and clothes. He was stripped to his waist and covered in grease, a huge muscular man who moved to kneel meekly a short distance from the bed of his saint. "Miss Oleton," he said reverentially, "or anything you or the saint need." "Water," said Mercedes. "Clean water, and Chiral asked for more paper too." Crewman's eyes lit up. "He's writing something?" Mercedes wished she hadn't mentioned it. "He's collecting his thoughts for her speech," she said. "He's still an iterator after all. If you can find some medical supplies as well, that would be useful. She's dehydrated." "The Emperor will preserve her," said the crewman, worry in his voice. "I'm sure he will, but we have to give him all the help we can," replied Mercedes, trying not to sound as condescending as she felt. The effect the comatose Euphrates had on the crew was extraordinary, a miracle in itself. Her very presence seemed to focus the doubts and wishes of so many people into an iron-strong faith in the distant Emperor. "We'll get what we can," said the crewman. "We have people in the commissary and medical suites." He reached forward to touch Euphrates' blanket and murmured a quiet prayer to his Emperor. As the crewman left, she whispered her own perfunctory prayer. After all, the Emperor was more real than any of the so-called gods the Crusade had come across. "Deliver us, Emperor," said quietly, "from all of this." She looked down, sadly, and caught her breath as Euphrates stirred and opened her eyes. Like someone awakening from a deep sleep, Mercedes reached down slowly, afraid that if she moved too quickly, she might shatter this brittle miracle, and took the image's hand in hers. "Euphrates," she whispered, "can you hear me?" Euphrates Keeler's mouth fell open. She screamed in terror. "Are you sure?" asked Captain Garo of the Death Guard, limping on his newly replaced augmetic leg. The gyros had not yet messed with his nervous system, much to his fury. He had been denied a place in the Death Guard spear tip. The bridge of the Einstein was open to the workings of the ship, as was typical with the Death Guard fleet, so Mortarian despised ornamentation of any kind. The bridge was a skeletal framework, suspended among the ship's guts with massive pipes looming overhead like knots of metallic entrails. The bridge crew bent over a platform inset with cogiter banks, their faces illuminated in harsh greens and blues. "Very sure, Captain," replied the communications officer, reading from the data slate in his hand. "An Emperor's Children Thunderhawk is passing through our engagement zone." Garo took the data slate from the officer, and sure enough, there was a Thunderhawk gunship passing close to the Einstein, a pack of fighters at its heels. "Smells like trouble," said Garo. "Put us on an intercept course." "Yes, Captain," said the deck officer, turning smartly and heading for the helm. Within moments, the engines flared to life, vast pistons pumping through the oily shadows that surrounded the bridge. The Einstein tilted as it began a ponderous turn towards the approaching Thunderhawk. " The scream hurled Chiral Cinderman from sleep with the force of a thunderbolt, and he felt his heart thudding against his ribs in fright. "What?" managed before seeing Euphrates sitting bolt upright in bed and screaming fit to burst her lungs. He scrambled to his feet as Mercedes tried to put her arms around the screaming imagist. Healer thrashed like a madwoman, and Cinderman rushed over to help, putting his arms out as if to embrace them both. The moment his fingers touched Euphrates, he felt the heat radiating from her, wanting to recoil in pain, but as though his hands were locked to her flesh. His eyes met Mercedes, and he knew from the terror he saw that she was feeling the same thing. He whimpered as his vision blurred and darkened, as though he was having a heart attack. Images tumbled through his brain, dark and monstrous, and he fought to hold on to his sanity as visions of pure evil assailed him. Death, like a black seething mantle, hung over everything. Cinderman saw Mercedes' delicate, cold, dark face overcome with it, her features sinking in corruption. Tendrils of darkness wound through the air, destroying whatever they touched. He screamed as he saw the flesh sloughing off Mercedes' bones, looking down at his hands to see them rotting away before his eyes. His skins peeled back, the bones maggot white. Then it was gone. The black, rotting death lifted from him, and Cinderman could see their hiding place once again, unchanged since he had laid down to catch a few fitful hours of sleep. He stumbled away from Euphrates, and with one look saw that Mercedes had experienced the same thing. Horrendous, concentrated decay. Cinderman put his hand to his chest, feeling his old heart working overtime. "Oh no," Mercedes was moaning. "Please, what is this?" "This is betrayal," said Keeler, her voice suddenly strong as she turned towards Cinderman. "And it is happening now. You need to tell them. Tell them all, Chiral." Keeler's eyes closed as she slumped against Mercedes, who held her as she sobbed. Tarvitz wrestled with the Thunderhawk controls. Streaks of bright crimson sheared past the cockpit. The fighter craft were on his tail, spraying ruby-red lances of gunfire at him. Istvan III wheeled in front of him as the gunship spun in the view screen. Impacts thudded into the back of the Thunderhawk, and he felt the controls lurch in his hands as he answered by ripping his craft upwards, hearing the engines shriek in complaint beneath him as they flipped the gunship's masses out of the enemy's line of fire. Loud juddering noises from behind him spoke of something giving way in one of the engines. Red warning lights of Price's telltales lit up the cockpit. The angry blips of fighters loomed large in tactical display. The Vox unit sparked again, and he turned to reach it off, not wanting to hear the gloating taunts as destroyed and any hope was lost. His hand paused as he heard a familiar voice say, "Thunderhawk on closing course with the Einstein. Identify yourself." Tarvitz wanted to cry in relief as he recognized the voice of his honor brother. "Nathaniel," he cried, "it's Saul. It's good to hear your voice, my brother." "Saul?" asked Garo. "What in the name of the Emperor is going on? Are those fighters trying to shoot you down?" "Yes," shouted Tarvitz, carrying the Thunderhawk around again, Istvan III spinning below him. The Death Guard fleet was speckling with glittering streaks against the blackness, crisscrossed by red laser blasts. Tarvitz gunned the Thunderhawk images, remaining engines, and Garo said, "Why? And be quick, Saul, they almost have you." "This is treachery," shouted Tarvitz. "All of this. We are betrayed. The fleet is going to bombard the planet's surface with virus bombs." "What?" spluttered Garo, disbelief, pain in his voice. "That's insane. Trust me," said Tarvitz. "I know how it sounds. But as my honor brother, I ask you to trust me like you have never trusted me before. All my life, I swear I do not lie to you, Nathaniel." "I don't know, Saul," said Garo. "Nathaniel," screamed Tarvitz in frustration. "Ship to surface Vox has been shut off, so unless I can get a warning down there, every Astartes on Istvan III is going to die." Captain Nathaniel Garo could not tear his eyes from the hissing Vox unit, as if seeking to discern the truth of what Saul Tarvitz was saying just by staring hard enough. Beside him, the tactical plot displayed the weaving blips that represented Tarvitz's Thunderhawk and the pursuing fighters. His experienced eye told him that he had a second at best to make a decision, and his every instinct screamed that what he was hearing could not possibly be true. Yes, Saul Tarvitz was his sworn honor brother, an oath sworn on the bloody fields of Prexenor campaign, when they had shed blood and stood shoulder to shoulder through the entirety of a bloody, ill-fated war that had seen many of their beloved brothers killed. Such a friendship and bond honor forged in the hell of combat was a powerful thing. And Garo knew Saul Tarvitz well enough to know that he would never exaggerate and never ever lied. To imagine that his honor brother was lying to him now was beyond imagining, but to hear the fleet was set to bombard their battle brothers was equally unthinkable. His thoughts tumbled like a whirlwind in his head, and he cursed his indecision. He looked down at the eagle Tarvitz had carved into his van braces so long ago and knew what he had to do. Tarvitz pulled the Thunderhawk into a shallow dive, preparing to chop back the throttle and deploy his air brakes, hoping that he had descended far enough to allow the atmosphere of the planet below to slow him down sufficiently for what he had planned. He glanced down at the tactical display, seeing the fighters moving to either side of him, preparing to bracket him as his speed bled off. Judging the moment was crucial. Tarvitz hauled back the throttle and hit the air brakes. The grav seat harness pulled tight on his chest, and he was hurled forward, and the cockpit was suddenly lit by brilliant flashes, and a terrific juddering seized the gunship. He heard impacts on the hull and felt the Thunderhawk tumble away from his control. He yelled in anger as he realized that those who sought to betray the Astartes had won, that his defiance of their treachery had been in vain. Plumes of fire surged past the cockpit, and Tarvitz waited for the inevitable explosion of death. But it never came. Amazed, he took hold of the gunship's controls and wrestled with them, as though he fought to level out his flight. The tactical display was a mess of interference, electromagnetic hash and radioactive debris clogging it with an impenetrable fog of a massive detonation. He couldn't see the fighters, but with such interference they could still be out there, even now drawing a bead on him. What just happened? Saul, said a voice heavy with sadness, and Tarvitz knew that his honor brother had not let him down. Ease down. The fighters are gone. Hi GG, welcome in. We're reading today. Gone? How? The Einstein shot them down on my orders, said Garo. Tell me, Saul, was I right to do so? For if you speak falsely, then I condemn myself alongside you. Tarvitz wanted to laugh and wished his old friend was standing next to him so he could throw his arms around him and thank him for his trust, knowing that Nathaniel Garo had made the most monumental decision in his life on nothing but what had passed between them moments ago. The depth of trust and honor Garo had done him was immeasurable. Yes, you were right to trust me, my friend. Tell me why, asked Garo. Tarvitz tried to think of something reassuring to tell his old friend, but knew that nothing he could say would soften the blow of this treachery. Instead, he said, "You remember what you once told me of Terra?" Yes, my friend, sighed Garo. I told you it was old, even back in the day. You told me of what the Emperor built there, said Tarvitz. A whole world where before there had been nothing, just barbarians and death. You spoke of the scars of the Age of Strife. Whole glaciers burned away and mountains leveled. Yes, agreed Garo. I remember. The Emperor took that blasted planet and he founded the Imperium there. That is what I fight for, to stand against the darkness and build an empire for the human race to inherit. That's what is being betrayed, my friend, said Tarvitz. We'll not allow that to happen, Saul. Nor I, my friend, swore Tarvitz. What will you do now? Garo paused, the question of what to do now that he had chosen a side uppermost in his mind. I'll tell the Andronius that I shot you down, The flare of the explosion and the fact that you're in the upper atmosphere should cover you long enough to get to the surface. And after that, the other leeches must be warned of what is going on. Only the War Master would have the daring to conceive of such betrayal, and he would not have begun an endeavor of this magnitude without swaying some of his brother Primarchs to join him. Rogel, Dorn, or Magnus would never forsake the Emperor. And if I can get the Einstein out of the Istvan system, I can bring them here, all of them. Can you do it? Asked Tarvitz. The War Master will soon realize what you attempt. I have some time before they will suspect, but then the whole fleet will be after me. Why is it that men have to die every time any of us tries to do what's right? Because that's the Imperial truth, said Tarvitz. And you can keep control of the Einstein once this gets out? Yes, said Garl. It will be messy, but enough of the crew are staunch Terrans, and they will side with me. Those who do not will die. The port engine juddered, and Tarvitz knew he didn't have much time before the gunship gave out beneath him. I have to make for the surface, Nathaniel, said Tarvitz. I don't know how much longer this ship will stay in the air. This is where we part, said Garo, an awful note of finality in his voice. The next time we see one another, it'll be on Terra, said Tarvitz. If we meet again, my brother, we will, Nathaniel, promised Tarvitz. By the Emperor, I swear it. May the luck of Terra be with you, said Garo, and the Vox went dead. Moments ago he'd been on the brink of death, but now he had hope that he might succeed in preventing the War Master's treachery from unfolding. That was what the Imperial truth meant. He realized at last. It meant hope for the galaxy, hope for humanity. Tarvitz gunned the Thunderhawks, fixed its course on the Precinctor's palace, and arrowed it towards the heart of the Coral City. That leads us to Chapter 10. Like I said, just a short little read stream today. Nice little short one. If y'all want to just kind of hold on a second. Just give me a little bit here. Nice little short reading stream. Just give me a sec.